All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Crossroads. This is our series here at Cross Labs in Kyoto to talk about all topics of diverse dynamics of intelligence, maybe even consciousness, related to also new technologies, how to augment human intelligence, how to communicate with other agents that are non-human, maybe even talk about alien life and topics that are fun like that. We are connected also with our sister entity in Tokyo that's called Cross Compass, dealing with advanced AI here in the Japanese industry. And yeah, we are very happy to have our amazing guest today, Dr. Fernando Rosas. Hi. Fernando is coming to us from the University of Sussex, and many fields he has tackled before, maybe from complex systems, cognitive science, neuroscience, recently also AI safety more, and today he will talk to us in front of a very nice audience of students. Welcome, by the way. Thanks, and welcome to Cross Labs. He will talk to us about the many phases of emergence. Right. And here you go.
Thank you, Olaf. And yeah, I'm very happy to be here in Cross Labs. It's such a great place. And I'm very excited to talk about my favorite subject, that is emergence. So if you haven't heard about emergence before, don't worry. Like, the talk will introduce the notion and we'll explain it from different phases. And the idea is to combine a bit of philosophy, like ideas, and also more applied stuff. So ways in which those ideas can be measured and then can be used for something practical. So let's go for it. Let me start with this video. I don't know if you can see. This is basically a flock of birds. And when we see that, I don't know if you have seen a flock in real life, but whenever you see a flock of birds like that, you feel something special. Like, this is not any other thing. There is something quite interesting happening there. And the intuition is that there is some emergence is sort of something like this. And I start from the position that we recognize when we see it, but we cannot put our finger on what is the thing that makes the flock to flock in a interesting way. And that's the type of thing that we want to capture a bit better. Like, what is special about flocks? And intrinsically, like my direction is that flocks are sort of birds, are interacting, and all of them together, they do something interesting, right? And my interest, I come from neuroscience. Brains are a lot of neurons doing something together that is interesting. So are neurons flocking in some way? Do that make sense? That's sort of the direction where I want to go. Another video that I found somewhere in the internet, you have these little animals there interacting with a dog, and you can see that they work together very effectively, and they do things in the world that they couldn't do on their own. So also, we will get to this, but some people, when they say about emergence, they say, no, this is just a way of talking. It's a way of describing systems. But these animals, because they work together, they do things that they couldn't do by themselves. And that's not a way of talking. They are making a difference. So what is that? That's where we want to go. So for this, the presentation today, we have 4 parts. First, I will present a very general view on what is emergence and give little tools on how to think about it. Then I'm going to present 2 views on emergence. So part of the thing is that a lot of people think, oh, emergence is this thing and I just need to capture it. My position will be, actually, it's not one thing, it's multiple things. And what we have to do is to distinguish, disambiguate, what are those things and how they are related to each other. And just to illustrate that point, I will present 2 such phases. And I'm not claiming those are the phases. I'm just saying these are 2. There might be many more. But at least having 2 in our minds is useful, because oh, these 2 things are different, but they're sort of similar, and you start getting a feeling of the thing. And then at the end, some summary to wrap up. So a little bit of philosophy. So first, when thinking, how things work, one option is to take this very reductionist view where you say, a duck, just physics. Yeah, it's made of parts and they're doing the thing. That's just physics. When you have a brain, the same, just physics. What is the difference between a duck and a brain? Nothing. Just that the brain has more parts. And the parts are very small and it's very hard to track them, but intrinsically it's the same. And this is one position. We could say just physics doing their physicsy thingy, and that's it. And I don't think there is anything wrong about this position. I don't find it very interesting. Another position is emergentism. That is to say, let's say we crack down particle physics, we have the perfect theory of microphysics. Is that explaining communism? And I think most people outside of the physics department, they would say no. And the question is, why not? So why cannot we derive social phenomena, art, everything out of particle physics? So if we accept that you cannot derive it, then you have to ask why. And then there are two options. One you can say the impossibility is in principle. It's not a matter that is hard. It's not a matter that we don't have enough compute power. It cannot be done. And this is a possibility that I will describe as strong emergence. So there is some gap between the microphysics and the big things that we see around us. And this gap cannot be breached. And one claim about this position is to say that big things, macroscopic features, have causal power that cannot be reduced. So they can do things that cannot be explained in terms of what the parts of them can do. A little bit of a softer position, because a lot of people feel a bit uncomfortable when you go so strong and say, you know what, actually, you cannot bridge this. A easier way out of this conundrum is to say, well, you cannot do it, but it's only in practice. In principle, you could do it, but it's just too hard. It would take the age of the universe, etc., etc., or it's too energy inefficient. You need too much energy to do the compute, but it could be done. So this is a possibility that is sort of trying to bridge these things, and is usually described as weak emergence. And then in terms of causal power, the statement would be, you can always reduce the causal power, but it's just impractical. So we have these three positions. Now, if we focus on the question of causal power, and you say, can big things have causal power that cannot be explained in terms of the parts? A reductionist would say, hell no, simply not. Strong emergence would say yes, in some cases, and then people start arguing which are those cases. Maybe consciousness, maybe social stuff, maybe economics, who knows, depends who you ask. And weak emergentists would say, it looked like that, but actually no. So they will take a position in between. Now, what do I think about this debate? And let me put it a bit in a funny way. I look at it a bit of a pillow fight, because there is no definition of what is causal power. And causality is one thing that if you don't think about it, seems to you easy. But the more you think about what causality is and how can you measure it, is like a rabbit hole, and you just go down and down. It's complicated. So unless you fix the notion of what is causal power, then the discussion, I think, makes no sense. Then what is to reduce something? We haven't also defined what is that. And also, like, coming from a more physics background, I would like to have a minimal example of this, a minimal system that is simple, that I can see in front of me and I can play and I can say, oh, strong emergence, weak emergence, whatever. Like, and that will help me to ground these discussions in something a bit more concrete. And a last point is that I would like to measure something. I also have an empirical side of my brain, so I do experiments. I don't do experiments, but some of my friends do, and I would like to measure stuff in the experiments that I could reason about in terms of emergence. And this type of discussion that is so high level, don't tell me what to measure. And I would like to measure something in order to reason about emergence. So my plan is the following. I see these two extremes, like magical emergence that is so crazy that if you can explain it, is not emergence. I'm not interested in that, because it feels like a dead end. You're going too far. In the other case, like, yeah, it looked like emergent, but there's nothing there. I feel it's too little. And my interest is in between. Like, what is the space in between these two extremes? How can we navigate? What are the trade-offs? What do you need to assume? What can you get out of those assumptions, etc.? So to explore this space and to understand it. And so this is what I would call a compatibilist view in emergence. And more specifically, I would like a framework that has philosophy, but not too much, not too little, to be complete, but not overly complicated, but that allows you to do two things. One is to establish formal hypotheses about emergence. So if I say consciousness is an emergent property of the brain, I would like to stop and say, okay, what do you mean? Exactly. Not like, that's not enough. This is too imprecise. Tell me more specific. What do you mean? And hopefully, the formalization of this, I would like to have equations for this. Like when I say the brain is the conscious emergent, an equation that this is the equation that make that statement precise. And then if I have such equation, hopefully that will tell me how to verify that equation from data. So then I can do an experiment, I can get data, I can test the equation, I can get statistics, I can get p-values, I can reject the hypothesis, or like experimental science. So that's what that's my interest. I'm not saying that I think philosophers should stop thinking about emergence, nothing like that. This is just what I want to do. And I feel that that's a very good complement of the more theory-driven discussion about emergence. So that's the overview, like the big picture. Now, how can we do it more concretely, and how are different approaches to it? So let's go in one direction. One way to think about emergence more specifically is to think about this multi-level nature of the world. So if we think of our knowledge, it's structured like by layers, right? You have chemistry, you have biology, you have sociology, like, and we see this everywhere, that a given, like the world, the planet, can be described at different scales, and depending the scale you choose, you will find different entities, and their interactions are going to be different. So if you see it at the level of quarks, interactions are going to be of some type. If you see them at the level of humans, interactions are going to be quite different. So it feels that systems can be described at different scales, and every scale has its own idiosyncrasy. And this is an empirical fact. We see this. Now, another sort of tangential point that maybe is not so tangential is, what are abstractions? So we tend to think in our daily life, oh, there is a bronze sphere, and it means that it's made of bronze, but it's a sphere. And these are different things, but they are instantiated in the same object. Is that related with this stuff of layers? Is it that abstract things are sort of more in the top and the concrete are more in the bottom? I have a hunch that it is true, but yeah, we can discuss about it. But this is sort of similar type of motivation. Another motivation for this, and the thing that led me into this discussion, was this all discussion that you see popping in social media regularly. Is the brain a computer or not? And neuroscientists get all very angry about it, and they have very strong opinions. And my personal position is that depends how do you define computer and computation. And under some definitions of computer, the brain obviously is a computer. Under some other definitions is obviously not a computer. In neither case, you're learning too much about what the brain is doing. And that motivated me to try to think of a different way of conceptualizing computation, such that I could learn something. And out of that, I start thinking about software. How do laptops work? Like, I think my laptop computes. I don't think a rock rolling down the hill computes. Both are physical systems doing physical things. So what is the difference? And the intuition is the following. When you write a script in Python, and you have some input variables, and let's say A, you put some value for A, B, some value for B, and then you do a computation, and then you get an outcome. You put enter, you print the result, and you get 5, right? And you do it again and again, you get 5 every time you do it. However, the physics, this is a physical system doing a physical dynamic to get you the answer. And every time you run the thing, the dynamics are different. The physical system is different. The spins and the electrons are doing different things. So every time you run the same script, it's doing different things at the micro level, but at the macro level, it's doing the same thing. So it seems that computers, like laptops, they are physical systems, but they have a level of description that can be controlled at the coarse grain level in a way that is self-contained. So you put inputs at the level of software, this get instantiated at the level of physics, they run in terms of physics, and then you read at the level of software, and things are reliable. So that's sort of the intuition that I wanted to capture. So for this, I start doing a bit of mathematics. So then you can have a microsystem described by a variable x, x1, x2. This is time going forward. And let's say Vx is a vector that is very high dimensional because it's the whole description of the computer with all the states of all the parts, super complicated. And then we have set, that is a simpler description of the computer. Usually we would say there is a function that takes x and gives you set. And what G is doing is that it's throwing away a lot of information. So a lot of states in X will go to the same set. You are losing information, you have a much simpler description. So for example, in the case of the computer, X could be the physical state of the whole thing, and set could be the state of my variables, of my Python thing. So this is the basic framework. So we have a system described at the micro level, very complicated. At the macro level, much simpler. And the idea is that at the micro level, the system has dynamics given by Schrodinger equation or whatever you want. And at the macro level, the system has dynamics also that are like inherited from physics. So if you see the system at the simpler level, that is what we do. They have some dynamics that is processing that are inherited from physics, but it's just a simpler version of what is happening below. Now, my point is that I start thinking that software is when you have this level of description that is simpler, that is self-contained, and it works on its own. And it has its own internal logic that don't depend on the micro level. And after you start thinking like this, you start seeing software in the weirdest places. And my favorite example is the toilet flush system. So you know how the toilet works when you flush it, right? So you have some water, you press the button and the water goes out, and then the water starts filling back, and there is a floating device that is going to be low. And when the water pushes the level, is pushing the floating device, and that will close the entry of the water. And then the thing stops. So I claim that software. That's a while loop, if you know programming. So it's a while the floating device is off, then pour water, and as soon as the thing stops. So it's a logical software running on some messy physics, because there's a lot of hydrodynamics and turbulence and the state of the momentum of the water molecule, and the software don't care about that. The software care about very few macro variables, and the important thing is that the macro variables interact with themselves and they don't care the level below. Sort of a similar example, if you have a self-driving car, a Tesla driving or parking on its own, the car takes as inputs very coarse-grained video cameras. Is not, measuring the quantum state of the street, although the street is made of quantum parts, right? But the car itself, to navigate, needs very simple coarse-grained information, and it does great. And so my claim is that it's sort of the same thing. And what is quite intriguing is that for us human beings, we live in quantum or string theory world or whatever, but we don't care about it. Our life is made on decisions made at a very coarse-grained level, and we do fine. So we are all in this type of regime. We are all software running at some scale of the world. So this is sort of the intuition. And then the idea was how to put this into mathematics. And for this, I use something called information theory. I don't know if you have ever heard of information theory. So the idea is that you have variables on top. These are random variables. And below, you have a magical formula that if you don't know it, don't worry. But the idea is that whenever you have an I that equals information, it's called Shannon mutual information. It's a way that if you have two variables, you can measure how much information they share with each other. So in the bottom left, you have the mutual information between boldface set t. That means everything in the history of set until time t. So the whole history of set. And then double thingy, and then set t plus 1. And that means that you're asking how much information about the future of set, so the state of the set at t plus 1, can you obtain from seeing the history of set before and all the way back. So this is capturing how much information you can predict about the future of set given the past of set. The right side of the equation say how much information you can predict about the future of set, but not from set, but from X, from the past of the micro thing. So you're basically comparing two predictions. You are predicting what is going to happen at the macro level based on the macro history versus how much you can predict based on the micro history. And they claim information closure happens when you get the same prediction. You don't get a better prediction because you are watching the strings, the quarks. So that's information closure. Another way to put it, you have just macro information, you're getting a prediction, and you are wondering, if I have to pay money to measure quantum states, should I pay that money? Is that going to enable a better prediction? If the answer is no, then you're in an informationally closed system. That level of description is enough for everything that can be predicted. That doesn't mean that everything is in the macro. The macro is sufficient for the task of prediction itself. It's self-sufficient for predicting itself. That's the idea, information closure. Now, if that's one thing, I also wanted to capture something about causality, something about intervention. You might be familiar, causation is not correlation. And causality, here the intuition was, what are the differences that make a difference? So if I'm an experimenter, a controller of the system, can I control the system equally good at the macro level or at the micro level? So the idea here, if you're controlling the system, it means that, let's say you want a specific outcome at times t+1, and you're going to set it in a specific way at the macro level. So you're going to put the quarks in your favorite way. But for that, you need very thin fingers, so to speak. So maybe you don't have such thin fingers. Your fingers are very fat. So you only can set things, but not so precisely. And that would mean to control the system at the macro level. And the question is, do you get better outcomes if you can control at the micro, very fine level? Or maybe you get the same. And that is the intuition of causal closure. A causally closed system is a system that you would not control better because you have access to the micro states. Everything that can be controlled from the macro. Now the question, how do you formalize that? At here, we come to a mathematical tool called the Epsilon machine. Epsilon machines, the intuition is the following. You have variables that are like a process, something happens, something happens, something happens. And at some point you make a cut and you say, this is past, this is future. And the question is, you have the histories, and the histories make you the prediction. Like, you know everything that happened before, and based on that, you can predict something about the future. And you ask yourself, what histories should I distinguish, and which ones should I consider they are equal? And the idea here is that you only discriminate histories that have distinctive predictive power. So if two histories that are different give me the same predictive power about the future, the forecast is the same. Like, given if this happened, I believe this could happen. And if this other thing could happen, my beliefs are the same. I would ignore the difference. I would say these are the same. I don't care. But if their predictions are different, then I care about it, and then I should distinguish. And intuitively, the causal states are the states that would make sense to be able to distinguish in order for controlling. Because are the states that if you choose history in the upper part of the yellow box, you will get one set of outcomes. If you put a trajectory in the bottom, you get a different set of outcomes. So it would be nice if you're controlling the thing to be able to discriminate between the causal states, but not more than that. If you distinguish more, then you are overworking yourself. So the Epsilon machine gives you the causal states, and the causal states are the sets of histories that make sense to distinguish in order for optimal control. Okay? And then the idea was the following. We can build the Epsilon machine from the micro to the micro. Like how to optimally control the micro future from the micro past. We can also build an Epsilon machine from the macro to the macro. How can I optimally control the macro in terms of past of the macro? And I wanted to have something in between, crossing the two scales. And then the question was, how can I optimally control the macro, so the future of the simple things, but based on very specific interventions in the micro level? And that's the arrow that goes from the bottom in the past to the top in the future. And you can build a definition, a formal definition for this. Yeah, I didn't put it here, but the definition for causal closure would be when you build the optimal control of the macro from the micro, you get the same that you would get if you do the optimal control from macro to macro. Put in a simpler way, optimal control can be done from the macro. You don't need to control from the micro to get more. You will not get anything else. Which is sort of very similar to the previous thing, but here is about control, before was about information, about prediction. And there are some results that these two things are equivalent under some conditions. Like in a nutshell, if you're observing, if your microsystem is complete, there are no hidden variables doing things behind the scenes that you don't observe, then the prediction and control is the same. In practice, this is not usually the case. Like if you observe the brain and you have some sensors and you want to do this is not the case because your sensors are not giving you all the relevant variables. So if your information is incomplete at the micro level, this equivalence doesn't work. But if it's complete, then causal clause and information clause is the same. Now, there is one extra flavor of this closure thing. So we have information closure, optimal prediction, causal closure, optimal intervention, and computational closure. And this is the most strange one, a more new one, and it's a bit difficult, more difficult to understand and to explain. But let's see what we can do. So the idea here is that Epsilon machines are these states for optimal interventions. But the funny thing is that when you see how, if you run the system and you observe how the causal states are jumping to another causal state, you will see a dynamics. If you have ever heard of Markov processes or Markov chains, the sequence of causal states is a Markov chain. And by observing the Markov chain is what is in top. So if you observe how the Markov chain is moving between states, that you can think of it as a blueprint of the computations of the system. So this is what the system is doing intrinsically, like it's jumping from this state to this state to this state. And my idea, yeah, forget about this. My idea was the following. If you have the micro system Epsilon machine, it will look like all these small yellow dots, and you have all these dynamics, you have this complicated network of the thing jumping between many states. Now, under some conditions, the Epsilon machine of the macro will be sets that are collections of smaller sets. So you have a machine inside of the other machine. The small machine is all these little states with the arrows. The big machine is these bigger states that encompass a lot of small states and bigger arrows connecting those bigger states. And if this is actually this doesn't happen usually. Like if you compute the two Epsilon machines of the two levels and you try to link them, usually they are not happy. They are not friends. But if one is nested on the other, the macro Epsilon machine is a coarse grain of the micro Epsilon machine, then we say this is computationally close. Let me give you, and this is and then the idea that comes out of computational closure is the following. So we have micro patterns, you have micro dynamics. You build the Epsilon machine of the micro. It's a very complicated thing. You coarse grain your data, you get different patterns, you get different Epsilon machines. And at each level, the Epsilon machine is a little bit different. And the question is, can you align the machines now? And if you can align the machines, that means the system is computationally closed. And then it looks like the right side of the screen, where you have every computational thing is, the macro level is a simpler version of the computations happening below. And let me give you an example to make this a bit more simple. This is my favorite example. I think this is the clearest. So this is an example where we're going to use this idea of computational closure. What is this example? In the bottom of the slide, we have a network, a lot of colorful dots, and they are all connected by links, right? So this is a modular network, meaning we have all these communities that are which are the nodes with the same colors, and that means they are strongly connected between themselves. So their links are strong, and their connections between communities are weak. So this is a construction. We are building this network, has a lot of nodes. They are very strongly connected between their friends, and they're weakly connected across communities. Now, on top of that network, we're going to put a random walk. So it's like a drunken person starts in one of the nodes, and at every time point, it will jump to another node. And the rule is you're going to jump proportionally to the strength of the link. So with high probability, you're going to jump to another node in the community. And with low probability, you're going to jump to a node in another community. And you can play this dynamic. You put play and you watch this drunken guy moving around the city, staying in the neighborhood, sometimes going to another neighborhood and stay there and then jumping. So this is one level of description of what is going on. Now, you can say, well, actually, I don't care where this drunken person is. I only care about which neighborhood he is. So you can describe the dynamics at the level of communities, and you can say it starts in A and stays there for a while, and then it goes to D, and then it goes to B. So it's a simple description of the same dynamic. Or you can further simplify this and to say, actually, I only care the size of the community he is, and I don't care if it's A or B because they are the same size. I say it starts in a community of size 25, stays there for very long, and then jumps to a community of size 9. So this gives us 3 levels of description for the same process. Now the claim is this is computationally close. What does it mean? It means I could simulate my system. I could run the computation that is happening at the bottom level. That is this very complicated decision process of I'm here, I'm then going there. There are many options. You could decouple as nested processes. So you could say first, this person is deciding what is the size of my next community. So my next community is going to be size 9. Then the person is deciding I'm going to a community D of the 3 because I have 3 options. Size 9, I could be E, D, or C. I'm going to D. And then within D, I'm going to this node. And you can see the computational process at the micro level that is running is actually these 3 levels of computation. And each of them are self-contained. And for example, if you want to simulate the system in your computer, and if you're not interested in the bottom level, you can simulate the mesoscopic level, the middle one, and your simulation will be perfect. You are going to have no errors because of forgetting details. That simulation is perfect. Or if you simulate the macro level, the more simple, that's also perfect simulation. Because the decisions at the level of size of community do not involve decisions below. The levels are isolated from each other. So what I find interesting of this example, you are factorizing a computation in levels. And you can decide the level of resolution that you're going to use for running it, depending on what you care about. So in my dreams, imagine you have an LLM that is doing something completely crazy and we have no idea what it's doing. What if we could do something like this? And you could factorize the computation that it's making in order to the next token prediction. And you could say, oh, I actually first deciding this type and then, so that would be nice because that would make more interpretable something that is completely monstrous in terms of how complicated it is. So this is an idea of how you can divide a computation into parts with levels of resolution and all of that. And you can only do it. This cannot be done always. This requires specific conditions that are this, and those specific conditions are the notion of emergence in this case. Yeah, and yeah, what time is it?
You have time. You should.
Okay. Let me give one other example about this. In the paper, we have thermodynamical examples, a lot of examples, but here, let me give one other that is called the Hopfield networks. Are you familiar with, have you heard of Hopfield networks? So the Nobel Prize of Physics was given to Hopfield this year. The idea of Hopfield networks is that you have a recurrent neural network. Let me start with this. You have a patterns of, you have some neurons, and the neurons can be on or off. So you have switches that can be on or off. And you start with some random condition. Let's say you start with the box in the center. And that sort of looks like a number 2, but it's a bit noisy, right? So a Hopfield network is a neural system that you can train to learn a number of patterns. And what does it mean to learn patterns? For example, here you could train it to learn 5 patterns, the pattern 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5. And what the system does is that if you start it in a noisy setting, the dynamics is going to start evolving on time, and it's going to go to the ones that is closest, that is most similar. So in this case, it's most likely going to run to the number 2, because it's very similar to 2. And this is supposed to be a model for how memory works, because with this you can retrieve information. It's like, oh, what was this? And then you start with something that is like a 2, and then the system itself will correct it, and will, it was a 2. So this is a mathematical model for information retrieval, and it was the very first of this kind, and that's why I got the Nobel Prize. And what we could show is that this is also computationally close. Put very simple, at the micro level, you can track which neuron is on, which is off, like all the detail of the specifics. But you can also compute something called the dot product. That is a notion of how aligned are the patterns. If it's a 0, it means they are orthogonal, they're completely different from each other. And if it's close to 1 or close to -1, is that they are either aligned or anti-aligned. And you can prove that if you track the dynamics only following, in this case, the 5 dot products, that it means like the sort of the distance that you have from the current pattern to the 5 possible destinations, that's enough. That's self-contained. So it will track its own thing and it will tell you where you're going to arrive. So, and this sort of makes sense because you can, if you flip one bit out of the 2 and another towards the 2, the distance is going to be the same. And this is sort of what the thing is. The system don't care which neurons are right and which are wrong. It only cares about the number of errors. And this is what it's capturing. It's like you capture the number of errors, and that's actually what is dominating where you're going to end. So this is telling you that this is a way of finding which are the right details for my systems working and which details are actually relevant. So good. As a summary, this is a view on emergence that is related with scales and about autonomy, like self-containment. And it has this notion of computational closure. And why is it cool? Well, I would say for 2 reasons. For the system itself, it's nice to have a computationally closed system level of yourself because that allows efficient controllability. Like if I try to control my body at the quantum level, I would go nuts. I just cannot do it. But my body is sort of self-controllable at the classical physics level. And that is what allows me to survive, right? So for systems, it's nice because it allows efficient controllability. For the researchers studying systems like this, it's also nice because maybe you want to simulate in your computer system, but maybe it's so complicated that you couldn't. But if you find the architecture of the target system and you find all the levels, you can choose what is the level of resolution that I need to simulate, and you are going to avoid over simulating stuff. And maybe different questions require different levels of resolution, etc. So knowing the blueprint of your system in terms of the scales that are self-contained give you flexibility to do a lot of things that you could not. Maybe you have a system that cannot be simulated because it's too complicated, but you will find the right things that you have to simulate, and then you can do it. So it could actually enable studies that otherwise you couldn't do. So this is what emergence means from this lens. Now, some people would actually say, actually, this is not emergence, because at the macro level, there is nothing that in the macro that is not in the micro. It's just that the macro is sufficient. And some people want to see something extra in the macro that is not in the micro to call it emergence. And because of that, they don't like it. Some people do like it and say, this is great. Some people say, no, I want something a bit more. So what could that more be? And this is one way to try to get that extra. Is another approach to emergence that is more related with flux. So the idea here is slightly different. We are going to have, again, the same as before, micro and macro. So a system described in all detail or described at a very simpler level. But what we're going to put an emphasis this time is to say that at the micro level, the system is going to be made of parts. So for example, if you have a flock of birds, the micro level would be every detail about the birds, but they are birds. Maybe there are 30 or maybe 100 birds. It's not a blob. You know, there are birds that I care about them separately, and I care of them as units. In the case of the brain, you have neurons, and the brain is made of neurons, so there are also parts. In the previous case, if you notice, we never use the fact that they're neurons, or we never care about the parts of the system at the micro level. So here we are going to care a lot about it, and that's the main difference between this approach and the previous one. And we are going to try to make a scientific, logically consistent notion of downward causation that some people say, no, this cannot be, or blah, blah, blah. This is one way to operationalize that idea. So how does it work? We're going to come with a definition. In mathematics, usually you can define whatever you want, but it's usually sort of the definition what you have to pay. And the business is how much you get out of that payment, like it's an investment. How much you get out of your investment as a consequence of your definition. So definitions are free, but theorems are the thing that gives the value of a theory is number of results divided by number of definitions, if you want. So the definition that we're taking out of the pocket is to say, I will define emergence as information about the future of the macro. That's the same as before. But now the trick is the following. How much information is in the micro that is not in the parts of the micro? And this sounds weird because, like, how can you have something in the micro that is not in the parts of the micro? And the intuition here is the following. Let's say you have a flock of birds. You have the micro description of the flock of birds, so what every bird is doing. And now you're going to ask things for individual birds, like bird number 1, what do you think? And when you do that, you're going to forget about the other birds. And then you're going to go, bird number 2, what do you think? And when you ask bird number 2, you forget about bird number 1. So you're asking each of the birds one at a time. And when you do that, you forget the other birds. So that's the trick. We're considering the micro, but not at the same time. We're considering one part at a time. And then the question is, how much information is in the whole that is not in the parts? Everything at the micro level. To give an example, concrete but abstract example, and then we're going to give less abstract. But this is very easy. It's very abstract, but it's very simple. So here, the thing works as follows. We have two binary systems. So is one system that have 4 states. So but the system has 2 parts. So the first part, x1, can be on or off, and the second part can be on or off. So the system as a whole can be on, off, on, off, right? And we are going to initialize the system in some situation, and then we're going to run dynamics following some rule. What is the rule? Well, the initialization will be completely random. You flip 2 coins, and that's the initial condition. But then the rule is the following. If the 2 parts of the system are equal, are going to stay equal with very high probability. And they will flip to be different with very low probability. Now, the trick is, if they are equally white, at the next time point, they can be equally white or equally black with 50-50. I don't care if they're equally white or black. I just care they're equal. And then at some point, they're going to flip to be different by chance with a low probability, so in the middle. And then at that point is white, black. And the next time point will be most likely different, but I don't care if they are white, black, or black, white. And that's a rule. It's a well-defined rule that you can write mathematically. You can write simulations. You can create data. You can build a data set out of this. Now, what is really fun of this system is that imagine you are one of the 2 parts of the system. You are part number 1. And you know that you are in state white. And I go and ask you, what do you think about the future, given that you are in state white? And you will say, I have no idea. Like, the fact that I'm in state white doesn't tell anything about the future. Like, I have no idea what is happening. So in a way, for you, it feels that the world is completely random. And you have no ability to push or pull anything. Nothing that you do makes a difference. And if I ask the same question to system number 2, it will answer exactly the same because the system is symmetric. However, the system is not random. There is something that is propagated over time. There is some regularity. The trick is that regularity is a collective property. Are they equal or are they different? This is a collective property that cannot be located in any of the parts. So they together, these 2 bits of information can predict one bit of information for the next time point. But that bit of information is not located in either one or in the other, but in both. And that is what is weird. Because both are useless alone, but they're useful together. That's something we call synergy in the literature. So they have synergistic predictive, they can predict synergistically. They can predict only when they're together, but not alone. And that is what this makes this thing to work. So synergy is that's sort of the intuition. All right. So as I said before, this is a definition, but now comes the 3 theorems that you get out of the definition. The first is to say, so by the way, the definition is about something we call unique information. So you are saying the whole. Oh, sorry. I made a mistake when I explained this. So here we have the vector micro, the micro vector that is x, and we have a feature of the vector, like one coarse grain, one property of the vector. It could be the center of mass of the flock. It could be whatever you want. So you are the question you're asking for identity. You always say B is emergent out of X. You're always saying one property of X is emergent. And the rule to say this is emergent is when that variable has information about the futures of the system. The future of the system is X on T prime. So anything about the system, it can tell something about the future that the parts cannot say. That is the definition. So we say B is emergent with respect to X if B has some useful information that cannot be contained in the parts of the system at that same time point. That's the definition. Now, you could ask, well, here you have a B candidate. It's like I have a flock, and let's say I care about the center of mass, and I want to know if the center of mass is emergent or not. But maybe I don't know what is V. I don't know what I'm looking for. I just want to know if the system is capable of emergence, but I have no candidate. So the first result is to say this synergy that I was saying before, this is the intrinsic property of the dynamics that allow for the existence of emergent properties. So if the system has some synergistic dynamics, and synergy means what I said before, that they together has more predictability than separately. If there is synergy, then that allows the existence of some B, some collective property that has that property that I said before. So this is sort of the capability for emergent. This is the intrinsic property of the microsystem that allows it to hold emergent features on top. Now, this is sort of, yeah?
Just allows or also makes it so.
Yeah, it makes it so.
It's if and only if.
Yeah, if and only.
So because there is no mic there, so just allows
so,
or
yeah,
makes
so
it so is
yes,
the question.
Yes.
Yeah.
And yes, there is an if and only if. So if there is synergy, there is one such feature. If there is one such feature, there is synergy.
Yeah.
Which is not super surprising, given what I said before. It's like, oh yeah, it makes sense. But what is interesting is that if you now embrace synergy as the capacity for emergence, then you can do a bit of mathematics that I will not do, but you can do a bit of more math, and you can decompose that synergy into two terms. And those two terms give you downward causation and causal decoupling. Downward causation means here, let me start the other way. Causal decoupling is the example we saw before. Because in the case we saw before, there's a collective property that is affecting itself. So the parts of the system has no idea there is nothing going on, but there is a collective property that is propagating itself. That is the party. And we call it statistical ghosts. It's like there's the thing floating on the system that nobody can see, but the thing pushes itself to the future. So that is causal decoupling. Now, downward causation is a little bit different. What downward causation is imagine the same case of here, but the parity, let's say if they're equal, they are going to force bit number 1 in the next time point to be white. That would be a collective property in the past affecting the state of a single agent in the future. And that is what we call downward causation. So there's a collective property that determines the state, not of a collective state in the future, but of a specific agent in the future. And the nice thing is that you get that there are these two modes of emergence, and they're not 3 or 7 because the math is telling you there are 2 modes. And you can prove that there are equivalent theorems to theorem 1. That is, like in theorem 1, you say there is this thing, and if and only if. There are some if and only if conditions for the 2 terms that you get out of this, for downward causation and causal decoupling, that have specific definitions that I will not present. I'm keeping things simple. And this is the second theorem. So up to here, we have a beautiful mathematical theory that is not very useful for computing things, because to compute this in practice is a pain, because you need too much data, and it's not very practical, especially if you want to have larger systems. Now, this theorem number 3 is what makes this practical. And this is a practical criterion that is sufficient, although not necessary, for emergence. And the idea here is the following. Let's say we have a candidate, the center of mass of a flock of birds. we compute the mutual information between the past and the future of the center of mass that you can think of as some type of autocorrelation. So how much the future of the center of mass depends on the past itself. And then you go bird by bird and ask bird number one, where do you think this flock is going? Like, where's the center of mass going? And the bird number one might have a very bad estimate, but it will tell you, oh, 0.5% of variance I can explain. So you ask each of the birds how much you can explain, and then you sum it up. And what you ask is, can you explain away the self-predictive power of the center of mass based on the predictive power of single birds? If the answer is no, then that's sufficient for emergence. Because there is some information about the center of mass to the center of mass that cannot be explained in terms of what the birds on themselves could explain. This is not necessary. One of the reasons is that you are summing the information given by each of the birds, and maybe the birds are very correlated between each other. So maybe the information they're providing is the same information and you're double counting. So there are a number of reasons why this is an overestimation. But what is nice is that this is very simple to compute. You're doing pairwise statistics. You're measuring two variables at the same time. You're never measuring high-dimensional things. And that lets you can do the game of life with a lot of cells and you can just do it. The problem is the bigger the system, you're going to have more double counting. So it's most possible that it will not work. But if it works, you can trust it.
Did you do it with the game of life?
Yeah, we did it. Yes, glad you asked. I don't know if you're familiar with the game of life. Yeah, great. So the game of life is this automata that you have conditions and super beautiful, and you have all this glider, something we all love. So what we have here was the following: we have this game of life that is a square array of cells, and we made a V, a property of the state of the game of life that is an indicator, is a binary vector that tells you are there blinkers or not, are there gliders or not. So for different particles, you scan it, and if you find one in this thing, you say yes, and if not, you say no. So you have a sort of an identifier of specific particles that we like. And what we did was a sort of a particle collider. So we put a lot of particles to collide with each other, and we did it many times. And the question about emergence here was, if you want to know the future of the macro, and that means who is going to be standing after the collision, what particles are going to be there in the long run. And you can try to answer that questions in terms of either which particles were in the first place, or what is the state of the first cell, what is the state of the second cell, what is the state of the third cell. And what we found was that you do a better job by knowing which particles were in the first place than by asking cells separately. Which makes sense. Like if you ask the first cell, are you on or off? I'm off. What can you tell about? Like nothing. Like you know. So that is what we get in this example. Now, one caveat of this. Here I'm interrogating single parts at the same time, so single cells. And you could say, well, that's super easy. Like, what cells know on their own? It's too small. There is a generalization where you can say emergent with respect not to single parts, but with respect to dyads, like groups of 2, or groups of 3, or groups of 4, etc. There is math to do it. The problem is that the double counting gets much worse, and the estimation of the second terms become worse because you have higher dimensional stuff. So theoretically it can be done. In practice, this doesn't work so well. But in theory, and if one is smart, one should be able to make better criterions, and that's something we haven't worked. But it should be able to, it should be possible. Now another example, birds. So here we have a mathematical model of bird flocking. So we have these vectors that are flocking around, and there are some parameters that you can play with. So we're playing here with a parameter that is about the alignment. So in the left, we have a very aligned flock that is doing exactly, is like a military system. They're all very rigid. In the extreme right, they're completely independent of each other. They don't care. And in the center, you have a mix. And the red dot is the center of mass. And the question here was, is the center of mass emergent? Like, is the dynamics of the flock emergent in some way? And long story short, in the middle, you have emergence. In the two extremes, you don't have emergence. What is the meaning of this? In the left case, the center of mass predicts itself because it's very clear what it's doing, but every bird can predict the center of mass because they're all solar aligned. So it's like, where the center of mass is going? We're the same where I'm going because we are all aligned. So it doesn't work. In the crazy birds example, like the center of the birds have no idea where the thing is going, but the thing itself has no idea. It's so random that there is nothing to predict, and that's why it doesn't work. In the middle case, there's an interesting balance because you ask every bird separately, bird, where this is going, and they have no idea. But the center of mass can predict itself to a reasonable degree, and that's sort of the trade-off that you get in this case. So the center of mass has some degree of self-consistency, that it knows where it's going, but each of the birds have enough freedom to do whatever they want, and the center of mass still is consistent. Good. And we have a final example here with this is all from the original paper. Here we took time series from a monkey, motor cortex, 64 intracranial electrodes. So you put electrodes deep in the brain of a monkey. This was extracted here in Japan, actually, from people in Riken, I think. So you have 64 channels of brain activity, and the monkeys were doing a food grabbing task. So they were grabbing some food with their hand. And we also have the data of the hand movements. So our initial question was, is the hand movement an emergent property of the brain? The tricky thing was you cannot put as a B the position of the hand, because you cannot derive the position of the hand from the electrode because you don't have enough measurements of the brain. So what we did, in order to not to cheat ourselves, we did an estimator of the hand position based on the 64 electrodes. So it's a function that takes the state of the 64 electrodes and maps it into the orange thing that estimates reasonably well the hand position. And then we computed emergence between the estimation of the hand position versus the actual electrodes, and we got that the thing was emergent. How much are we learning from this one? Not too much, a little bit. So how could they have failed? It could have failed if, for example, the first electrode was the source of the prediction. Like you predict everything from the first electrode. Then the thing is not emergent because all the information comes from this single electrode. This is telling you the thing is distributed. Like every electrode is contributing a little bit in this like mixture, but not too much beyond that. This is another application. We had data from subjects under disorders of consciousness. That means they have traumatic brain injuries. They are unconscious because of some accident or some problems. We have three types of patients, subjects. In the top, vegetative, effectively like coma or like not responding. We have some patients in a middle situation, like minimally conscious, so they have some signs of consciousness, but not too much. And we have controls that like to contrast again the other ones. So what we did here is that we compute the capacity for emergence of the brain states of these patients. We did a trick. So we cannot compute the capacity of the whole brain. Here is fMRI data, so we have like 200 time series. We cannot compute the synergy of the 200. So what we did is that we computed for every pair of brain regions, and that's why we end up getting this matrix. And based on that, we did some averages. And what we wanted to compare the average capacity for emergence of minimally conscious, unresponsive, and controlled subjects, and we saw a decrease, which was the prediction. Like there is more capacity for emergence in the brain dynamics of healthy controls, and it goes down when you have minimally conscious, and it goes further down. Not significantly so, but a bit less under unresponsive. And how much time do we have? Should I finish or is it okay?
Up to you.
Yeah. Okay. I'll do one little more thing. So this is related with the emergence thing, but it's not exactly the same. But it's a very nice study. So here, the emergence property is based on this diagram. You see this sort of football balloon with things. So you are computing these four numbers. And we did another study where we computed these four information things. And instead of getting the emergence bit, we got something slightly different. We got the topmost element here is divided in two. You see, the dark green one is the causal decoupling bit, and the light green ones are the downward causation. So in this other study, we computed the causal decoupling bit for every subject, for every pair of brain regions. And we also computed the very bottom one, that is about redundancy, like when the time series are very correlated, that they are having the same information. And we computed these two quantities for every pair of brain regions for 100 subjects in resting state. So we took some data that is publicly available. It's called the Human Connectome Project. 100 subjects in resting state condition. We took the fMRI data. We computed these numbers for every pair of brain regions, and with that we get networks, because we have one number for every pair of brain regions. So one redundancy network, one synergy network. We study the networks, how they look. This is how they look roughly. Then we average over rows, and that means that for every brain region, we have the average amount of redundancy that has with other brain regions, and the average degree of synergy it has with other brain regions. Then we took a ranking of this, so from the most synergistic to the least synergistic, and from the most redundant to the less redundant. And then to simplify things further, we took the difference of the two rankings, which gives you a gradient from the most synergistic to the most redundant. And then we plot it, and that's the way it looks. I don't know if you're familiar with neuroanatomy, but the blue thing in the middle, that's the sensory motor cortex. And the red thing in the front is the frontal lobe, where we make decisions and all of that. And the back part of the brain that is light up is part of something called the default mode network. That is the part that activates when we are doing self-reflection and things like that. So synergy, redundancy was very associated with sensory motor, and synergy was very associated with decision making and with this self-reflecting properties. And there's a lot of results about different brain networks that are more synergistic or more redundant. In all of this, I will skip this. If you have questions, then you can ask me. I can go more in details, more things. The result here in the right is very nice. We calculated these two networks, the correlation they have with the wiring of the brain, the physical wiring, the cables, the axons connecting neurons. And the redundancy network is much more similar than the synergy neuron. Now we compute the same thing in monkeys, and the spatial distribution is similar. And what is interesting is that the amount of redundancy is also similar, but the amount of synergy is very different. And then we did a correlation between this gradient between redundancy and synergy with two things. Cortical expansion, that is how much different brain regions expanded between monkeys and humans. And we saw a correlation, like synergy regions that are more involved in synergistic dynamics expanded more, and regions more involved in the redundant part expanded less. And also we correlated with the degree they express genes that are unique from humans, and there is also a correlation. So all of this is very nice. The only weakness of the study up to this point is that this is all observational data. We cannot say synergy is triggering this. We cannot say synergy is facilitating cognition, or it looks like that, right? And this is sort of a nice story, but we cannot say that because there is no causality, there is no intervention. There's just correlations between these things, and we don't know what is causing what. But to try to go a bit further, we did an analysis with artificial neural networks, where we train some very small neural networks to do different tasks. And we have 4 tasks, and they are arranged in a way that 2 of them are very similar, the other 2 are very similar, and between them they're very different. We train them either sequentially or interleaved, so one the other one, the other one, the other. And what you see is the following. if the two tasks are very similar, like in the left panel, you get very high performance whatever you train. If they interleave, good performance. If you sequential, you get good performance because the tasks are very similar. Now, if the tasks are different, then it's interesting. If you do sequential training, the thing forgets the first task, and then the performance is pretty bad. But if you do interleaved, you can manage to get both with a good performance. And what is really interesting is that only then you have synergy. So synergy is the x-axis in all these plots. And you can see that the level of synergy is always low, except if the tasks are different, but the thing is doing it both. So this is a suggestion that synergy is related with flexible learning. Like if you have a lot of neurons, you can assign different neurons to different tasks, and there doesn't need to be any crosstalk. But if you don't have so many, and you are using the same neurons to very different things at the same time, then synergy appears. Then and only then. So this is a bit more support to this story. So as a recapitulating this, it seems that redundancy, this sort of opposite of synergy, is related with input-output systems in the brain. So the tiger is coming, I have to survive, this has to work, it has to be fast, don't room for crazy things, then redundancy. And this is the thing that makes sense, that is similar to monkeys, because monkeys have to escape from tigers the same as us. Now, synergy is this distinctive thing that you are combining things to get this extra thing related with emergence. And these seem to be associated with high cognition and all these things that make humans different from monkeys. Of course, this is one study, it needs to be replicated, it needs to be generalized, but this is sort of an interesting story that emerges. So with this, I'm almost done. Just to recapitulate. So what is emergence? So my take is that emergence, just like intelligence or complexity, is not one thing, but it's sort of a cluster of things. It makes sense to speak about emergence the same way that it makes sense to speak about intelligence. But when you become serious about it, then you have to say, oh, by emergence I mean this. And I believe there are multiple ways to talk about emergence that make sense. It's not that one excludes the others. So and we have different formalisms today that they are capturing different aspects, and they could be more or less appropriate for a given investigation. So my belief is that if you have you want to do something on some system, and then different views on emergence will be more or less appropriate to what you want. So it's not that they are right or wrong, but they can be better or worse for your intention. So what are the flavors of emergence? Here we presented two. I presented two flavors. One is emergence as computational closure. That is this decoupling and relative autonomy between the scales of a system. And a completely different one called, I describe here as emergence as whole more than the parts. So here is that you have a collective made of parts, and the collective has some properties that the parts don't. So for example, the flock can predict itself while the parts cannot predict it. And these are two flavors. I'm not saying these are the only ones. I'm pretty sure there are more than this. And it would be great. I feel that it's progress when we disambiguate these flavors and we say these are different flavors, and there might be other flavors, and we have a map of all the flavors, and then we have the map of which is closer to which, and which are correlated, which are not, and then we learn. And is emergence the answer? I don't think we know, but all these advances are opening new ways to think about this, new theories, more experiments that can be done. And my belief is that combining theory with practice, like we think about this and then we use it, we see what the hell happens, we feedback to the thinking, and we keep going, and then we are going to make progress. And with that, I think I'm done. So thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you, Fernando. amazing stuff. I think, the level of difficulty to me felt very nice and entry level. But I do know that probably, there are a few concepts that might seem easy because we are in the field and might be challenging. But I think, you gave nice examples. So for the difficulty of the stuff that we're tackling here, some of these things are very difficult for me to understand after years of spending so much time on them. and yet, yeah, you made them seem easy, which is great. And yeah, so those are nice collections. I really like the picture, the multifaceted picture of emergence. Well, you gave mostly yeah, the computational closure and synergy, but we saw some of the other pictures in there too. Yeah, I think it's amazing. Yeah, maybe before we open for questions, yeah, I guess anyone can raise their hand, or if you prefer to write things down, here is a Slido link. It's also on for people on YouTube. But yeah, otherwise, yeah, any questions that comment and yeah, yeah, and it's probably better that I pass on the microphone.
All right, just for talking about emergence as a computational closer when we're talking about decoupling between scales of a system. I mean, the examples that you gave were kind of more within, we're moving between scales, but they're more closely related to each other. How realistic do you think it is that there could be systems of emergence when we're talking about two very large ends of a spectrum, like specifically with quantum physics moving up to Newtonian physics, where they tend to operate within completely different ideologies and laws?
Well, somebody made a very nice YouTube of this work, and he opened with the image that architects, they don't need to learn quantum mechanics. And I find this is brilliant, like because it's not that architecture is not instantiated over quantum mechanics, but if you are a constructor, you're building stuff, and you learn about quantum mechanics, is very little how much you will improve.
Yeah.
You know, so for me, that's one example of these very different scales that seem, I mean, I cannot prove it mathematically, but it feels that effectively they are quite decoupled. Another point to make is that the theory, the way it is in the paper, is like perfect decoupling. And I think this is very unrealistic in practice. And it might be that, for example, in the case of architecture, maybe it's not perfectly decoupled, but the level of coupling is very low.
Yeah.
And so it's like maybe the architect could improve Epsilon, you know,
Yeah.
but it's not worth of the effort. So it might be effectively. So thank you.
Well, connected to that, I think I love what the connection you made at the end about flexibility of learning. I had a similar question for the first part in terms of controllability, especially, and you haven't really talked about that, about I guess partial computational closure is part of the system, right? Is coarse grained into the higher part. That's one case, but of course you could have several levels of higher levels of descriptions that summarize the dynamics present at the lower levels, and you can have partial distributed closures. Is there something that we can learn from that kind of decomposition?
100%. You have to give me 6 months.
6 months? I'll invest in that. That doesn't sound long.
So the controllability part is a nice intuition, but I feel the framework at the moment you cannot really do it, because the framework is about predictions only. It's not about actions. It's not about, there's no controller in the maths. But my current work is to extend the same thing, but to something similar to reinforcement learning, where like the way I think of it is that you have reinforcement learning. If you have an agent that is not doing anything, it's just observing, you can still predict without action, and then you should get this theory. But hopefully in the extension, you will get something richer that can also account for interventions, like proper actions, but where you could have the same game with coarse grainings and everything. So then you should be able to do what you say. So if you have a big system, you could say, this is my agent, this is the thing that the agent is playing with, and then you should be able to coarse grain the view of that thing that the agent has and all of that.
Right.
So I'm working on that, and I'm very optimistic that it should work.
Very nice. And I guess there are two parts to this. It's having different partial closures, but the other part is the controllability of the system. So to create the knobs such that you can control the system in the ways you want to.
Wait, maybe I misunderstood part of your question. So
partial,
you say when the thing is branching.
It's branching, yes. Yeah, it's true that I use it in two ways, and in my mind they are sort of related, but they don't have to be, I reckon.
Yeah. So that was the partial thing is a nice outcome of the maths, because when we think of scales, I feel that we tend to think it as a total order set, like this to this to this to this, and we never see branches. But the math tells you that there should be branches. And my hunch is that the branching has to do with something about compositionality. Like if you have a system and you have a color and the shape and something, and if the system has different logics over operating on those things, there should be close but incomparable.
Right.
So my hope is that you can use something like that to identify compositional aspects from outside.
Right.
But this is something that I am still starting to explore.
Right. Yes. I don't know if my question was very clear, but I don't know. The example you could see is that you have, a layer of physics like electrons moving around or electronics, right? And you could have a totally different branching emergent system in which you have humans living in there, or you have another species or other like types of minds that live inside the brain that are not our reported personality. Maybe they're maybe something like that. No, different personalities or different agents. We definitely have cells that have their own agency within us, but maybe things that branch even more that we don't know much about. And we are very human oriented, I guess, in our thinking, and just thinking of this kind of math helping us figure out of how to track those different emergent machines, I would say. So those are, I view those as automatons, right? That you try to factor out.
Yeah.
Is that
I don't know. That's the answer. Like this branching thing was something very unexpected, and I don't think it has been. I haven't explored it really, and I haven't seen much explorations of these ideas. I think it's a direction. I'm not sure if it will get what you're looking for, but it might, or it might get to give some ideas. But definitely something that should be explored more.
Yeah. Because if there is branching, maybe there is convergence after branching, and all those structures are possible. No, in theory, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm just. This is crazy idea.
Mathematically, there is always convergence, right? Because you have something very complicated and you can describe it as nothing, and that computationally is one state that goes to itself, and that is over everything. Like any system ends up in that when you describe it at the level that you make no distinctions. And everything has to converge there. It might converge earlier, but it might only converge there. But mathematics is always like a lattice. It opens from the root and then it closes.
Right. I wonder if, to take a simple example of something like you playing a video game or you playing chess, you have the dynamics of the game. You see it being played by many different players. It could be something as simple as chess, where you could try to, in your mind, you're controlling the center. That's how you're playing, and there are many dynamics linked to this language of controlling the center. And or you could just think of capturing pieces, and maybe those two attractors are two ways of expressing the same thing. They have much of the same information, but just represented in a different structure. Those are machines that are partially, at least, equivalent. And I wonder if, that sounds like a very Worfian. Familiar with that.
What I can tell you that I know is that if your microsystem is actually two systems happening at the same time, without interaction, and you are ignorant of that, because it's not so easy to say. Like it could be that there are a lot of states and there's this complicated dynamic, and actually there's a smart way of factorizing it to say there are actually two processes happening in parallel without touching it. If that is the case, then you will have a branching. That is sufficient for branching. It's not necessary. So what I don't know is to what degree you can have correlated subsystems that branch also. That is the thing that I don't know.
Right.
But at least it should be a way to get if you know, factorizing things is nice in general. You have a complicated thing and you say, actually this has these 4 things that are happening in parallel, and each of them are much simpler. So that is one way of getting branchings.
Excellent. Yeah. I want to get to other questions. Martin, you have one? So was there someone?
I can
Not only one. Me neither.
Yeah, very nice. I like it. Can you? Maybe I asked a friendly question first. Can you go to these computational? What did you call it? Computational closure. Yeah. So you had a theorem about the first kind of closure, and it was maybe informational and causal closure. You had this theorem.
Yeah.
And then I was kind of hoping for another theorem.
Yeah, I miss it. Actually, there is a theorem that say these two imply computational closure, but not vice versa.
Okay.
And there's a simple explanation. I mean, in the beginning, I was surprised. I was like, wow, I thought there was going to be the opposite because computational closure looks more fancy or whatever. The reason is that the computational closure, I think of it in this way.
Yeah.
And this is sort of a topological property in a way. It depends on the connections that exist and don't exist, and do not depend so much on the actual numbers on those connections.
Okay.
And the other ones depend very much on the specific numbers of the transition probabilities.
Okay.
Like if you, so every arrow there is a transition probability, and if you
the probability.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the computational closure do not depend on the weights of those connections.
So computational closure is a possibilistic notion.
Exactly. That's exactly
so that's what blocks the arrow in the other 2 computational closures. Doesn't mean the 2 other ones.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah. So the other 2 imply this,
right,
but vice versa doesn't work.
Right. Yeah, I completely missed it. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. No. I was very surprised about this, and when I came across this possibilistic story, and I see of this as an algebraic property more than a I don't know how to call it, more continuous property.
And so can you go to
I'm pretty sure there's a forgetful functor or something there.
Yeah, I'm wondering also. But so, and the causal closure, what you said, yeah, but it is kind of, was the theorem actually that it's if and only if also?
And here, yes.
So those things are actually the same thing.
If the micro is fully observed.
Yeah, but of course it is.
Yeah.
I mean,
like, yeah, you can.
If it's not, then you don't have the micro. I mean,
yeah. I mean, in a context of physics, it's obvious that it should be, and that's why the paper put it like this. In neuroscience, is obviously not like this.
And informational closure is actually just so that's basically Birchinger's notion.
Transfer entropy
zero. And so so that's cool. I like it. Maybe now I still ask the less friendly question. it's also friendly. But I do think like you. Well, I'm going to try to ask it non-adversarially. So, in the first in this part of the talk, you vary the scale, right? And then in the second part of the talk, you also have some coarse graining there to V.
Yeah.
But you also vary something else that isn't the scale.
Yeah.
Which is
you have a partition as a micro.
Is it actually? I don't think it's. Yeah. But partition? No, I don't think.
Maybe
partition is not the right word either. No, it's like because you're making assumption. You're kind of cutting interactions.
Yeah.
So you make. I don't know what's the right word here. It's not scale. It's connectivity or group.
We call it mereological or whatever.
Mereology.
Mereology is the thing of the parts. It's not a.
But the thing is, the important thing is that you're changing the dynamics, the dynamical law, because when you're cutting the connections, what you're actually changing is the dynamical law.
You're not cutting them. You are ignoring the others, but you're not changing. You're marginalizing.
Exactly, you are actually conditionally marginalizing.
No, you're not conditioning. You're marginalizing.
But you're marginalizing the dynamics.
Like yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So
Like
you're kind of
like there. You have the dynamics of X with the thing, and you're marginalizing all the other parts.
Which one are you pointing at?
It's the theorem 3, the bottom part left. The summation, the terms in the summation.
K to N XT XK. Ah, this is the fully. Yeah, but wait. I'm kind of confused.
How about I let you chew on that and we discuss more later, or do you have it?
One thing that might also bother you or other people is that this is not transformation invariant in the micro. So if you do a rotation of the micro, it breaks change completely.
Yeah, but it's not really the one of. Can I get the most?
Yes.
I guess I cannot. I failed at doing the non-adversary thing. No, but I guess the thing is, why do you think it's? I mean, you actually didn't. You don't really do it. I'm not really sure you do it. But do you call you? I think at one point you did call it micro. You called like the separated thing micro.
A micro part.
This. Yeah, exactly. But like I object to the use of the word micro. But okay. I know what you mean, and it exists, and it's super interesting. Anyway, even if I don't like it, that you call
terminology, yeah. Potato.
Yeah. All right. I'm coming back to the questions asked on YouTube or in the Slido. So one is, these are nice ways to describe and quantify emergence. In your opinion, what is the most exciting and unexplored use for one of these approaches?
I mean, in my very biased opinion, the most exciting is the AI interpretability. Like, I think AI systems are combinations of little parts that are doing crazy things, and we don't understand them. And maybe you can apply some of these ideas to understand how they work.
Right. That's mostly for computational closure, right?
Or
both, or any of these.
Like, for example, you could also use notions of synergy and redundancy to characterize. We have a paper almost finished on like the role of different synergy in different parts of the neural network and between different layers through training, etc. So hopefully these ideas can also help to understand how these things work.
So how difficult is it to coarse grain into this simpler Epsilon machine?
I mean, there are many things that are difficult. Like, one is to choose the right coarse graining. That's pretty hard. Like, if you don't know what is the right coarse graining and you start trying different ones, you're in trouble. Well, I have to say, so this theory is more mature. We have been working on it for longer, and I think we have the whole pipeline designed. So you have the theory and the practical criterion. Like, it's not finished, and there's a lot to do, but it's complete. The other one, we have the first bits, but we don't have practical criterion yet. So it's very hard to compute. The old examples that are in the paper is things that you can think of them until you sort them with a pen and paper. But there is no way to. Well, there are. Lionel Barnett has work related that he has some very nice ways to do some computations on identifying informationally close subsystems. Under some assumptions, is based on linear coarse grainings and stuff, but it's a very nice starting point. So there are some work, but yeah, there is a lot, especially on the computational side, things to work. And the reason why I haven't done it is that I feel that it makes no sense to do a computational thing for the perfect case. I think we have to sort what is the right leaky version of it, and only then we need to do the computation for the leaky version. So I want to first come and the leaky version, you can do it in many ways, but it feels that there should be the right way of doing it, and for that you need to work a bit. So in my head, the steps are first sort out what is the right leaky version, and then build algorithms for that. And because we don't have those, this is difficult to apply in that context.
Yeah, I see this as a theoretical step that is necessary, a bit like coarse graining we were hoping a few decades ago would help everything in macroeconomy and like prediction and so on.
But the other thing that I'm pretty excited is that there is recent work on using Epsilon machines on transformers. And I was super excited when I saw it. So basically, you have a process that a transformer is learning. You figure out the Epsilon machine of the process that you're learning, and then you see that the Epsilon machine gets in the transformer. And that makes me very hopeful that this can be combined with this.
Yeah, it feels like this, what is it, pours very nicely into the other part of your work in AI safety and understanding other agents' goals, including AI goals.
Exactly.
Do you want to say some things about that? Or?
Yeah, I mean, like I started, I got into that because I felt that it was so important. You know, like if I have to think any research topic anything that I can think of, I feel that's the most important one that at least I would like to contribute to. And at the same time, I feel that it as you say, it sort of fits so well with all of this. So yeah, I'm super excited about it. But I start like working on that relatively recently, like less than a year ago. So that's why I'm just starting to work in the first paper. So it's also a new world. So it is. I'm getting slowly into it, but I'm super excited about it, and I'm very optimistic that there is a lot of interesting stuff that can be done just using these tools, but tailoring them for that and scaling them up. But I think there's a lot that can be done.
Yeah. So I don't know if people are aware here, but I'm sure people are aware about large language models and all the awesomeness that came out of it. Maybe use them on an everyday basis. It's so difficult to know what the machine really thinks behind the facade layer and them being trained to seem human and addressing our on the surface our problems. And I think approaches like these sort of allow you to sort of by coarse graining, bring it at the level of understanding of humans, how they feel without dissecting machines. Like if you meet a human on the street, first thing you do is not you dissect their brain, right? You try to sort of empathize, see what their goals are, what they're about, what their interests are. And this is, in my view, at least, this is what we're trying to do here. This is what are the emergent properties that we can align with, and so on.
Yep.
And it feels
so there are two things that I find very promising. One is that there's a whole debate now if LLMs think or just memorize and they're parrots. And I feel this has potential to answer that. And this work that I was mentioning already have some really interesting insights on how you could discriminate between a system that is just input-output without thinking versus a system that is cranking something inside before talking. So I find that very interesting. And another aspect that I find equally promising of this type of approaches is that it feels everybody agrees that for AI, we need to understand better what abstractions are. Because systems, the only way that they can think and they can generalize, etc., is by having some notion of what is an abstraction and how they work. And I feel that this is going in a very useful direction of a way to conceptualize abstraction in a way that is both very intuitive and at the same time computationally tractable, and you can do computational stuff with it. So yeah, a lot to do.
So yeah, maybe we could take one more question. I don't know. Is there something? It could be a more general question as well. Anything is okay. Yes, please.
You'll need this mic. It's extremely general.
Yeah, can you hear me? I'm just curious, is evolution by natural selection an example of computational closure? so far as mutation would be causally decoupled from the environment, in which case we might have a way to formalize
Yeah, it's a
creation.
fascinating question. I usually think of computational closure, the decoupling, not with respect to something in front of you, but something below you. So I don't know. I mean, it should be possible to frame it. I think we talk about that at some point. So, but it should be possible to maybe use the same machinery to tackle that question in terms of isolate, like computation with respect to an environment that is just sort of in front of you instead of the micro that constitutes you. It should be possible, but yeah, and there is a lot of attempt to try to think of evolution in terms of computation and all of that. So yeah, that's an interesting idea. I have to think more about it, but thank you. That's a very cool idea.
There's a question, one more question I just read from YouTube that maybe we'll take. Yeah, right. I've reviewed that. Yeah, I'm seeing one more question from YouTube. Let's take that one too. So someone says they have been thinking about your two approaches to emergence for quite a while, and believe that there's a critical difference regarding information redundancy. I like that we've been talking about that a lot. So the closure approach appreciates both synergy and redundancy. When microelements share similar dynamics, high redundancy, it becomes easier to extract prediction, I guess, macro features. Make closure. All right, that's a long sentence. But in contrast, the causal emergence approach focuses mostly on information synergy. What are your thoughts on this difference?
I think that you should write a paper.
yeah, that's right. You should write a paper about
it. One thing that puzzles everyone, me and everybody around me, is that the causal decoupling and the computational closure, they seem similar, but they are not similar, and technically they are quite different. So that's one of the things that we would like to do, like to understand better to what extent they are equivalent, to what extent they are different. And intuitively I understand what this person is saying, and I agree, because what the suggestion is that the second approach is only focused on a specific type of information, while the other allows both. So it might be that you have a system that is computationally closed with synergistic information, might also be emergent in the other sense, but if you have a system that is computationally closed with redundant information, might not satisfy the second criteria. So that could be a distinction. Yeah, I hope that this person can work on this and publish something, because I would love to read that. Yeah, but that's something we need. So my view is that the way to move forward is both to identify these flavors, and also once they have been identified, to build the connections. Like, how are they related to each other? Do one imply the other, or under what conditions, etc.
Yeah. All right. I have one more general question, but you have a more precise question, I'm sure. And we'll finish with this. Yeah. Okay. All right. Go for it.
So how does this? So the causal decoupling. Okay, I got mixed up. I thought the causal decoupling was actually something like informational closure, but it's different.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pain, but the canonical case of a causal decoupling is the parity bit that propagates itself. Now that is.
So what's the causal decoupling exactly in the parity bit thing? In the parity bit case, what is
the micro is the two binary things.
Yeah.
The V is the XOR of both at the same time, and then the causal decoupling means that the thing predicts itself, but none of the parts predict the future of the parity.
None of the parts. Oh yeah.
It's the part that is predicted by the XOR, but not predicted by.
So it's sort of decoupling of scales, but it's different. So you see, that's the sort of.
Scale.
Fair enough.
To me, it's very, very close, but yeah. What was my right? Well, it might be a tangent, but I was wondering about when we were talking about those levels of emergence, right, from each other, thinking of nature and so on. So my question is, what about the mind? It's a very general question, but I'm thinking more specifically, we touched on the Worfian side of things, how substrate or structure of language, right, on top of physics and so on, might determine what is possible on the top, and feels like this picture makes it very evident that there are constraints over higher level dynamics that come from the bottom level. I think nobody usually disputes that, and yet, yeah, there is some kind of autonomy within the higher levels that we are talking about, right? I forget what word you used earlier, but yes, in the higher level, you have a sort of element, and that's what people who argue for strong emergence usually talk about, that there is something special at the highest level of the mind that is nowhere to be found in the lower levels. And I know we are in the more gray areas that are more interesting to you and me. And yet, yeah, what is the possible resolution between this paradox of Worfian, what is it, constraint from language to mind, and yet this autonomy of the mind itself?
I mean, the reason why I haven't written anything about this is because I don't know. And I think it's a very difficult problem, and I prefer to go slowly about it. My guess, another distinction that I would like to make is between intelligence or cognition and consciousness, because mind sometimes is used to englobe both, and my feeling is that they are very different. Thing about cognition, my inclination is to think that cognition is something about playing with abstractions, and abstraction would be something like coarse grainings and stuff. So I would be very happy with that. To think that you have control mechanisms that work at different scales, and they push and pull each other, and depending on if you find the right scale, they are very efficient or effective or whatever. So I would think I could envision a way that you sort of sort cognition from physics in that way. Of course, I don't know how to do it, but I could imagine it working. Now, the consciousness story is a bit more complicated. You could take an IIT view and integrated information theory and say maybe it's related with synergy and emergence in that sense. But my problem is that that doesn't explain me where feelings are coming from. And the more,
Right.
and
yeah, we talked about that earlier.
Yeah, then I feel that we need something else, and I don't know what is that else thing.
Right.
It feels that then you have causality and counterfactuals, or something that is not just functional. So a limitation. Well, one reason why I got into computational mechanics and Epsilon machines and all of that was that I start feeling a bit of frustration based on playing just with patterns. Because all that is just like, oh, we have these patterns, all these correlations, all these funky correlations of synergy and whatever. But at some point, it's like, okay, I want a bit more. And I feel the computational mechanics give you a little bit more, because it tells you the structure of the Epsilon machines and some flavor of computation. But I'm not sure if that is enough. And sometimes I feel that maybe we need extra stuff, something more related with structure and causality and counterfactuals and something like that. So that might be a way to. I feel that we need more. I don't know exactly what we need, and I'm exploring that.
Amazing, yeah. Thank you. If there are no more questions, we'll go into stealth mode and say bye to people on YouTube. Thank you so much, Fernando, for coming over and giving this amazing talk.
My pleasure. It was super fun.
And yeah, please visit us again, and we'll keep chatting about this. Thank you, everyone, for participating today. And yeah, please tune in for our, I guess, next event coming up soon.